Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new Elder Scrolls Online video with me, Sherman. Today guys, we're going to be doing something a little different than what I usually do with my videos here. We're going to be doing a comparison thing to ESO and Dungeons and Dragons. A lot of people have asked me over the past few days, especially now that I'm, kind of incorporating D&D into my channel, how much of a comparison is there between D&D and Elder Scrolls? And the truth of the matter is that they're literally the same game, like one and the other. It's like you couldn't make a game closer to D&D than what they did with Elder Scrolls. And there are other games out there that are really close to D&D, don't get me wrong, but Elder Scrolls was literally built on the foundations of Dungeons and Dragons. First off, how many different types of elves are there in ESO? There's 3, just like there is in D&D. There's the Dark Elves, there is Wood Elves, and there is High Elves. Now, if you notice, Dark Elves in this world are different than they are in the worlds of, say, Forgotten Realms, or even Eberron and Wildmount, or not Wildmount, but yeah, that world. Any D&D world, even Greyhawk has different elves. They might have Wood Elves and High Elves, but they're going to be different based on their society and their culture of that world. And I think that's why ESO stands out so much to people like myself and many other D&D fans, is the fact that it does use a lot of the same representation of D&D. And a lot of people will say, well, we only have 3 stats. In D&D you have 6. Well, you could break this down into those 6 stats. And in fact, you could break it down into 5 of the stats, and the 6th stat is actually incorporated into your skill lines through the Fighters and Mages Guild. But for example, you have stamina, which would be a representation of your strength and dexterity, because your stamina is what determines how powerful your melee or stamina based stuff is. So it'd be like your physical damage, your physical capabilities, your ability to fight with weapons, ability to fight with bows. That's where that comes from. Then you have your magicka, which is the same thing as like a cleric or a magic user or a warlock or a druid. All of them would use magicka, but they would build it into intelligence, wisdom, or charisma. And that's in 5th edition. In the older editions, it was intelligence or wisdom you'd build into to give you your higher stats that would play into your character a little bit more. And then you have your max health, or your health stat, which would be basically the same thing as putting into constitution for a fighter or a barbarian, that kind of thing. and that's also where the Trinity system falls into play. See, in the pen and paper, the Trinity, it really isn't there, even though a lot of people try to make it there. But you can make a tanky character. Like, I can make a tanky artificer, I can make a tanky paladin, I can make a tanky barbarian, I can make a tanky ranger, I can make a tanky anything, even a cleric, and have the same capabilities that a tank in ESO would have. The same capabilities even. So I could intimidate somebody to keep their attention on me, kind of thing. There's a lot of things you can do, and I think that's where a lot of it comes from, in a sense. So, talking about skills, though. Now, in D&D, a lot of this stuff that, like, the Templar would have would be related to basically a paladin and a cleric. Not so much a druid, not so much a fighter, not so much a magic user, but because the magic is more related to the divine side, you would be more related to that of a cleric or a paladin. And depending on which path you took or what skills you took would really play into that overarching arc of your character. So there's a lot of things that you could look at there. When it comes to weapons, choosing to be trained in two-handed sword and shield, dual wield, and bow, but not destruction staff or resto staff, would mean that your character would be more heavily based on the physical side. So you would probably build more into stamina or more into dexterity, strength, and constitution. So that way you could fight on the front lines, or you could fight from the shadows, or whatever, and you could take advantage of that stuff. When it comes to the destruction staff and restoration staff, same thing applies. Just like with most of your class skills, a lot of them are magicka based, and that's because the game is built on this idea of like, hey, we want you to have an assortment of ways to play. So when you play stamina, you've got more physical through two-handed sword and shield, dual wield, and bow. But when it comes to magic, you've got more class-specific magic abilities, and you've got more weapon-specific magic ability. So it plays in that whole idea of like swords and sorcery. So there's a lot of a comparison when you talk about Dungeons & Dragons when it comes to armor. Armor doesn't play into D&D like it does here. Light armor in D&D is leather armors. It's chainmail. Those are light armors. Then you got medium armors, which is like scale mail, splint mail, breastplates. Then you got your heavy armor, which is like plate mail and things like that. But in D&D, like, not all tanks or fighters or magic users or clerics or whatever, they use an assortment of different armors based on which path they go down. So there's a lot of different things and similarities to these two games. And I really do like how they put these games together. Then you have like your world skills. But let's talk a little bit about guild skills, because this is where things get even more closer to the D&D standard. So you have the Fighter's Guild. What is the Fighter's Guild in Elder Scrolls? In Elder Scrolls, the Fighter's Guild is a group of soldiers, mercenaries, whatever you want to say, that are trained to fight against pretty much everything. They're trained to go out and fight. And that's what a fighter is. They fight. And then you have the Mages Guild, which is the practitioners of magic. Both of these are literally in Dungeons & Dragons. There's fighters guilds, there's mages guilds that you can join in some of the campaign worlds, which is really cool. And then you have like the Thieves Guild. That's pretty normal to run across like multiple different Thieves Guilds in D&D. Assassin Guilds, same thing. Or Dark Brotherhood guilds, that kind of stuff. Like, these things are in that. And the other cool thing is that a lot of this can be easily translated into pen and paper, which is also really great, because you could take this game world, convert it into the D&D standard, and play literally in the world of Tamriel. And be like, this is where I want my D&D campaign to take place. People are familiar with it. They know the Elder Scrolls setting. So you could create a homebrew version of Tamriel for your D&D group, where they go on adventures. They go to take on different Daedric princes and stuff. And then it would really be interesting to see how you would play warlocks into it, how you would play clerics and paladins into that kind of world, because you don't have just the Daedric princes. You also have the Aedrith and Daedrith and the different sub systems to the pantheon. And then you have the higher pantheon, which it doesn't get talked about a lot in Elder Scrolls. So I think it's really cool that we have all this stuff that makes this representation. Now, some of the things that ESO lacks, that, no offense, the old Elder Scrolls games had, was like more traps, more puzzles. ESO lacks that. And to a lot of people, it's more of a murder hobo game. And that's just a term that we use in D&D, as the players just go fight to get XP. And a lot of MMOs do that. And I think that's where a lot of MMOs lose their luster when it comes to the idea of high adventure, high fantasy. We're supposed to be these heroes of the world, and yet a lot of us don't feel like heroes anymore. We feel way overpowered, and nothing seems too strong or too difficult for us to take on, especially when it comes to long-term players and what they call in-game players. There isn't a lot of stuff for them to do when they get there, because of the fact that they've pretty much become so powerful or out-leveled everything else in the game that the rest of the game world is pretty obsolete to them when it comes to difficulty or challenge. Then they have to move into the harder categories of stuff like veteran dungeons, hard mode dungeons, veteran trials, hard mode trials, or even playing in Cyrodiil or in Battlegrounds just to get a challenge. And for some people, it can be fun. For others, repeating the same content gets boring and dull, and it's like, wow, I've done this dungeon like 7 million times. I'm sick of it. Even though I've gotten everything I need out of it, I'm still running these dungeons to get these keys, which I'll never use until they come along with a new set that's going to be worthwhile to me. And so there's a lot of this stuff that's left behind. See, in true pen and paper, you don't get a 5-piece set of armor. You get your armor. You might find a belt that's magical. You might find gauntlets that are magical. You might find, some boots that are magical, a cloak that's magical, and rings and jewelry, kind of things that are magical. But here's the other thing. In that, there's rules too. Like, you're only allotted so many rings and necklaces that you can wear that are magical. And they don't have set bonuses. So, like, if you get a +5 plate mail or +3 plate mail or whatever, it's just the armor. If you get a ring that gives you natural armor +2, that'll add to your armor of 2. So it's like, a lot of the elements are still here, but it still doesn't play like a true pen and paper game. They take elements of it and they incorporate it into the MMO space. Excuse me. So you have everything that would be in the pen and paper version, but it's done differently to fit into this massive multiplayer space in a way that can be fun for people and entertaining. But at the same time, there's a lot of things that it lacks that you can't get here that you can get in pen and paper. Like, when you go into a dungeon here, it's pretty much set. When you go into a dungeon in D&D, it might be set, but there's always that chance that you're going to come across secret doors. You're going to come across different things that this game doesn't include. So there's a lot of things that are here that are, that make the game fun, but it's still lacking the other stuff, which can make it even better. So, yeah. But yeah, in a comparison, how close is ESO to D&D? It's really close. Probably the closest game besides something like EverQuest 1. Or, I would say EverQuest 2, but that went, I would say, further down the rabbit hole in the MMO space, just like World of Warcraft did. Even though they do use a lot of the elements of Dungeons & Dragons statistics, armor, weapons, that kind of stuff, they threw away a lot of what makes D&D or the adventure fun. Like trying to get by traps and figuring out puzzles. Those are super integral to the D&D standard. And not only that, but there's other things too. Like you can't just jump on a mountain and ride across the country and run across adventures. So like the storyteller has to plan out stuff, and they do the same thing here when they release expansions or DLCs. They're just advancing like the overarching storyline. or the overarching campaign. So like you know, when they add places like Western Skyrim, they're basically adding a new campaign setting to the game. And like a DLC would be like a module. So like when you get something like Southern Elsewhere, that would be a module that's giving you something specific to that area, but it's smaller than a campaign, because a campaign is like a huge area or location that gives you a bunch more content or a bunch more story to play through than a module. A module just gives you like a couple quests, you know, like side quests, that kind of thing. It's nothing major most of the time. So that's the way I perceive a lot of ESO, is they took a lot of the elements of D&D and just tried to make it into this. And not only this, but I mean, you take Skyrim, for example. You take Oblivion, Morrowind, Daggerfall, going back all the way to Arena, and a lot of those games, like Arena, Daggerfall, and Morrowind, were built really heavily on the D&D structure. And then Oblivion, Skyrim, kind of deterred a little bit from those, because they took away the stat system and implemented the 3-stat system of stamina, magic, and health, and they did away with other things too. You know, they simplified the systems. And it was probably just to make it a lot easier for people to jump in the game and play, and not be concerned with this idea of like, oh, I've got to play with these stats to give my character these abilities. Here you can just say, hey, I want to be a healer, I want to be on the divine side, or, you know, I want to be on the magic side, like the damage dealing side. I've got these optional classes, but then I can choose to go down a, you know, how I choose to play it depends on the class I choose, and how you know, what tools I use from the class, and the armor and weapons and all the skill lines. And you can kind of come up with this custom character that could be a, you know, a person who was, you know, a dark shadow magician, but isn't that anymore, is more of a, like a warlock healer. You know, they use their magic to draw life from enemies and give it to their allies. There's a lot of things you can do that you can represent from other games with the way you make your character in this. And I think, again, that's something that makes ESO stand out from a lot of other games. And then the third thing that makes it stand out a lot is ESO is a sandbox more than it is a theme park. It has theme park elements when it comes to story layout, how you experience stuff, but it has a sandbox element, and you can go anywhere in the world at any level and still play and not be restricted. See, D&D is a lot of the same things too, because like you can take any adventure and change its structure to fit that of levels lower than what the requirements are for that, just so you can just say, hey, I want to take you guys through this adventure. It's super cool. Even though you're too low level, I want to take you here, but I'm going to change it so it fits your level. Like, you can do that in that game. And they kind of did that here with the level scaling. Said, hey, you know what? We're going to do away with this idea that you got to be a certain level to play certain content. We're going to just let you play it and let you experience it. And it has its positives and negatives, just like with any game. And I think that's, again, where a lot of people, you know, that the sense of overpower characters comes from, is once you get so powerful in this game, there is no, like, there's no boundaries to your character. Your character just walks around and destroys everything in its path. That's because your characters just become that powerful. And they incorporated the, you know, the champion system, which would basically, in D&D terms, be like a specialized path system. Like, oh, I want my character to be tanky and damaging, you know, like have these resource management, have this, you know, damage capabilities. So you build into that kind of structure. It's just a thing that allows you to modify how your character plays into more of the characteristics of your design. So you still have that character that's a tanky character, but it can be more DPS if you wanted to, or you could be a wizard, a mage character that can tank or heal or deal damage. You know, you have these different tools in the game, not just the skills you pick, but also how you put together your character with the equipment, the champion points, and all that allow you to really define how you play your character and really define the kind of character you want to play. Like, somebody asked me, is there a way you could play a bard in this game? Yeah, there is a completely 100% a way you can play a bard. Because a bard's just a storyteller. They're an adventuring storyteller. They travel the world with adventurers and tell their stories. So yeah, you could do that. You could do that with a multitude of different, functions in your character. Like, you could do it with a character in light armor. You could do it with a character in medium armor, heavy armor. It really wouldn't matter. It would be dependent on how you choose to play them. And, like, which way you focus them. Like, somebody who plays a bard is going to be trained in both magic and... So they're going to be a hybrid. They're a jack of all trades and a master of none. Like... And that's literally how they're even described in, D&D, as they're a jack of all trades. They have this ability to take on all these different arts, but they don't master any of them. They become really good with all of them. And not phenomenally good, just good enough to get by, so that way they can rely on the others of their group members and play off that. So it's really cool. So, but yeah, don't think that, either that I'm trying to deter you from the idea of what an MMO is. Like, there's going to be there's going to be stuff in it that doesn't pertain to that of pencil and paper. There's going to be stuff in it that does, but it still plays like it, and it still allows you that flexibility, and especially in a game like this, where your character is even more sandbox than most characters in most games. I mean, because you can really define how your character plays, how they run in the world. Like what they do. You want your character to be a thief assassin? Make your character a thief assassin. Go down and learn the Thieves Guild, learn the Dark Brotherhood, learn how to be that, and then focus your character into being that. And then when you're not doing that and you want to adventure, then you can focus into the more of the adventuring side of damage dealing, that kind of thing. I mean, it's up to the player to decide how they play their character. But that's the cool thing about role-playing games, is you get to pick the role you want to play and define it. So... What do you want? But that's pretty much it for this video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, you guys know what's coming next. Go ahead and hit that like button. If you guys want to see more videos by me, you can subscribe. Other than that, I want to thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day. And this guy might see you in game. Bye.